The millionaire woman burst into tears when she saw the children and their father. And the reason is heartbreaking. The chilled leather of the Tesla's seat pressed against Serafina Hayes's back, a stark contrast to the warmth of the $1 million contract resting on her lap. At 32, she commanded the boardrooms of Aegis Holdings with the same relentless drive that had forged her empire from nothing, yet today, ensnared in the relentless gridlock of Grand Boulevard, an unfamiliar impulse made her gaze lift from the endless columns of figures. Through the tinted window, Viridian Gardens stretched like a verdant oasis amidst the urban sprawl. Her eyes, ever trained to seize opportunity even in chaos, caught a flicker of movement on a familiar bench, a man there, gently rocking a stroller with one hand while two identical blonde-haired girls chased pigeons nearby. A sharp intake of breath caught in her throat. Caleb Maxwell. Even from this distance, she recognized the tender slope of his shoulders, the distinctive way he ran his fingers through his dark hair when lost in thought. 5 years had vanished since their last encounter, 5 years since she had silently slipped from their shared apartment in Riverside Borough, leaving behind an engagement ring and 2 6-month-old infants whose demands had simply transcended her capacity to give. Her driver announced traffic was beginning to flow, but Serafina barely registered his words. The little girls, Hazel and Ivy, her mind whispered their names like a forgotten prayer she was just relearning, now raced towards Caleb. They could not have been more than 5 years old, all golden curls and infectious, bubbling laughter. One launched herself into his waiting arms, the other tugged at his jacket, both chattering excitedly about something only children found truly fascinating. Serafina watched Caleb's face transform as he listened to them, his smile utterly genuine, radiating a warmth she had almost forgotten could exist. He effortlessly lifted one girl onto his shoulders while the other clambered onto the bench beside him, a scene of such perfect domesticity, such natural, unforced affection, it felt like peering into the window of a life she had never learned how to embrace. The Tesla lurched forward as the traffic's pulse quickened, but Serafina found herself unable to tear her gaze away. For 5 long years, she had meticulously constructed the belief that her departure had been the only viable choice, convincing herself that Caleb was better off without her, that the girls would flourish unburdened by a mother who prioritized quarterly reports over bedtime stories. Yet, seeing them now, witnessing the vibrant, thriving family she had abandoned, something profound fractured within her chest. Tears came unbidden, hot and startling against her cheeks. When was the last time she had wept? When was the last time she had truly felt anything beyond the cold, sterile satisfaction of another successful transaction? Her driver inquired, "Are you quite all right, Miss Hayes?" his concerned eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Serafina quickly wiped her eyes, her reflection in the glass revealing a stranger, a woman whose flawlessly applied makeup could not conceal the raw, sudden vulnerability in her gaze. "Turn around," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ma'am, turn around, return to the gardens." But by the time they had meticulously navigated the snaking traffic and circled back, the bench lay empty. Caleb and the girls had vanished, absorbed into the bustling current of Metropolis Island's inhabitants as if they had been nothing more than a fleeting mirage. Serafina remained there for 20 minutes, her stare fixed on the vacant bench, before finally directing her driver to take her home. Yet, as Metropolis Island's iconic skyline blurred past her window, she knew with an absolute, chilling certainty that her meticulously constructed world was on the precipice of irrevocable change. The woman who had built an empire by resolutely never looking back had just encountered her past, and for the first time in 5 years, she desperately yearned to find her way home. The sleepless night stretched endlessly before Serafina as she paced her sprawling penthouse apartment, the distant city lights twinkling below like unreachable stars she had never bothered to wish upon. By dawn, her decision was forged with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to every high-stakes business venture. "I require the utmost discretion," she informed Silas Thorne, Metropolis Island's most renowned private investigator, speaking from behind her polished mahogany desk. "Cost is no impediment." Silas Thorne, a former federal agent with silvering hair and perceptive, knowing eyes, studied her intently. "Precisely what are we seeking, Ms. Hayes?" he asked quietly. Caleb Maxwell resides somewhere in Riverside Borough with twin daughters, Hazel and Ivy. They are 5 years of age. Her voice remained steady, yet her fingers, betraying her composure, drummed nervously against the desk's smooth surface. "I need every detail, an address, phone number, employment records, daily routines, financial situation, everything. I require this within 48 hours. True to his word, Silas Thorne returned with a thick manila folder, substantial enough to reconstruct an entire life from its contents. Serafina's hands trembled perceptibly as she opened it, revealing photographs that made her breath catch. Caleb appeared older, noticeably thinner than she remembered, lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, his clothes, though clean, bearing the subtle wear of someone meticulously stretching every dollar. The images captured him at a local elementary school, a teacher now, she learned, earning barely enough to cover the rent on a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Willow Creek. But it was the candid pictures of him with Hazel and Ivy that truly unraveled her. Every image radiated pure, unadulterated love, Caleb patiently assisting with homework at their tiny kitchen table, the three of them sharing ice cream cones on their building's front steps, bedtime stories read by lamplight in a room filled with mismatched furniture but walls adorned with a vibrant tapestry of colorful drawings. "He has raised them entirely alone," Silas Thorne reported matter-of-factly, his voice devoid of judgment. "Never remarried, barely dates. His entire world revolves around those girls. Neighbors describe him as an exceptional father, patient, devoted, always putting them first." Serafina stared at a photograph of Caleb pushing both girls on swings at a neighborhood playground, their faces luminous with uninhibited joy. This was the life she had walked away from, this was the profound happiness she had so foolishly convinced herself she did not desire. "There's more," Silas Thorne continued, his tone growing somber. "The financial records indicate significant medical expenses. Regular doctor visits, specialist consultations, prescription costs that are consuming the majority of his salary." Medical expenses, Serafina's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "For the girls?" "No, ma'am. For him." The folder contained Caleb's precise address, phone number, work schedule, and even the exact route he took walking the girls to school each morning. Everything she needed to step back into their lives, if only she could summon the courage. That night, Serafina sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by awards and accolades that suddenly felt utterly meaningless, clutching Caleb's phone number like a fragile lifeline to a world she had abandoned but, she now realized, had never truly ceased to love. Tomorrow, she would make the call that would irrevocably alter everything. Serafina stared at her phone for 3 agonizing hours before finally dialing, her hands shaking so violently she had to redial twice, each failed attempt feeling like another small betrayal of the courage she was desperately trying to muster. On the 4th ring, his voice answered, deeper than she remembered, weathered by years of single parenthood and struggles she could only begin to imagine. "Hello," the single word, devoid of inflection, nearly shattered her resolve. 5 years of profound silence stretched between them like an insurmountable ocean she had meticulously constructed with her own choices. "Caleb," her voice emerged as barely a whisper, a fragile thread. It's Serafina." The ensuing silence was deafening, a vacuum that pressed in on her. She could distinctly hear his breathing alter, could almost feel the shock radiating through the phone line, spanning the distance from Riverside Borough to Metropolis Island. "Serafina," his voice cracked audibly on her name. "By all that is holy, after 5 years you just call me Caleb, please. Do you have any conception of what you did to us, what you did to me?" The raw pain in his voice cut through her like shards of glass. "You simply vanished, Serafina. No note, no explanation, nothing. I came home from work and you were simply gone." The girls were 6 months old and cried for hours because their mother dissolved into thin air. Tears streamed unchecked down her face as she pressed the phone closer to her ear, as if mere proximity could somehow bridge the vast chasm of hurt that lay between them. "I know I caused you immense pain. I know there is no justification," she choked out. "Damn right there's no excuse," his voice broke completely. "Do you comprehend how many sleepless nights I walked the floor with Hazel and Ivy, both of them crying, wondering if their mother was dead or alive? Do you know how many times they have asked me why other children have mommies and they do not?" Caleb demanded, his voice thick with anguish. "Caleb, I saw you yesterday. In Viridian Gardens. I saw you with them," Serafina confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you were watching us." The anger in his voice shifted to something raw, deeply vulnerable. "How long have you been observing us?" he demanded, his voice laced with disbelief. "Just that once, I swear. I was caught in traffic and I saw you on the bench with the girls. They are beautiful, Caleb. They look so incredibly happy. They are happy. We have painstakingly built a good life without you." His words stung, sharp and unforgiving, but Serafina pressed on, her voice imbued with a desperate urgency. "I made an egregious mistake, the greatest mistake of my life. I was terrified, Caleb. I was 27 and utterly paralyzed by the prospect of being responsible for 2 tiny lives. Aegis Holdings was my entire world then, and I believed. I truly believed." "You believed what?" "That we would be better off without you," he finished for her, his voice devoid of emotion. Yes, the admission emerged broken, a whispered confession. "But I was wrong. I have been wrong about everything." Another long, heavy silence descended. She could faintly discern hushed voices in the background. Hazel and Ivy, she realized, her daughters, innocently asking their father who was on the phone. "What do you want, Serafina?" Caleb's voice was weary, resigned. I want to see them. I want to try to rectify this, to make things right. Make it right, his laugh was a harsh, bitter sound. You cannot simply appear after 5 years and expect to play house. These are my daughters. I raised them. I have been there for everything. They are my daughters too. No, his voice turned ice cold, cutting her off. You forfeited that right when you walked out that door. Please, she was begging now, all pretense of control utterly abandoned. Just allow me to meet them. Allow me to try to explain. Explain what? That their mother is a selfish career woman who abandoned them as infants. The accusation hung in the air like a poised blade. Serafina closed her eyes, knowing she deserved every cutting word. One meeting, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That is all I am asking. If after that you never wish to see me again, I will respect that. But please, Caleb, grant me one chance to attempt to make amends. The silence stretched so long she thought he had hung up. Finally, his voice returned, quieter now, edged with exhaustion. One meeting, in public, without the girls. If you can convince me you have changed, if you can prove you will not hurt them again, he paused, a long, drawn-out moment. There is a cafe at the corner bistro at Elm and Oak tomorrow at 2. Do not be late. And do not bring any of your corporate theatrics. This is not a business negotiation. The line went dead, leaving Serafina alone with the crushing weight of 5 years' worth of consequences and one impossible chance at redemption. The corner bistro at Elm and Oak buzzed with typical Metropolis Island energy, yet Serafina sat frozen at a corner table, checking her watch obsessively. 2 o'clock arrived and passed. At 2:15, she wondered if Caleb had changed his mind. At 2:20, she saw him through the window. He looked worse than in the surveillance photos. The Caleb who walked through that door was merely a shadow of the man she had once planned to marry. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had shed at least 20 pounds, and there was a tremor in his left hand that had been entirely absent 5 years ago. He spotted her immediately, his jaw tightening as he approached. Without a word, he slid into the chair across from her, his eyes holding a mixture of raw anger and something else, something that looked dangerously close to hope. You look exactly the same, he said quietly, and it was not a compliment. Caleb, you look. She stopped herself before saying terrible. You look tired. 5 years of single parenthood will do that. His voice was flat, controlled. What do you want, Serafina? She had rehearsed this moment 100 times, but sitting across from him now, all her carefully prepared words evaporated. I want to know my daughters. Your daughters, he leaned back, shaking his head. Hazel asks me every few months why she does not have a mommy like her friends. Ivy pretends it does not bother her, but she hoards pictures of mothers and daughters from magazines. That is what your absence has done to them. Each word was a knife twist, but Serafina forced herself to listen, to absorb every painful syllable. I was young and scared. We were both young, his composure cracked, revealing a deeper pain. I was terrified too. You believe I had any idea how to be a father? You believe I was not overwhelmed? But I did not run, Seraphina. I stayed. You are right. You are absolutely right, and I am so sorry. Sorry does not give me back 5 years of sleep. Sorry does not explain to two little girls why their mother chose a boardroom over them. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but Caleb's expression remained hard, unforgiving. What changed? He asked suddenly. Why now? Why after all this time? Seeing you in the gardens, seeing how happy they looked, how profoundly they love you, it made me realize what I had thrown away. So this is about you. Your regret. Your guilt. No, she leaned forward desperately. It is about them. They deserve to know they have a mother who loves them. Love. Caleb's laugh was harsh, devoid of mirth. You do not abandon people you love. The accusation hung between them like an impenetrable wall. Seraphina wiped her eyes, struggling to find words that could somehow bridge 5 years of devastating damage. I know I do not deserve it, but I am asking for a chance. One chance to prove I have changed. Caleb studied her for a long, agonizing moment, and she saw the internal war playing out behind his eyes, the fierce father protecting his children battling against the man who had once loved her enough to propose. They are fragile, Seraphina. Hazel especially. She is sensitive, observant. If you hurt them, his voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a primal fear. If you disappear again, it will destroy them. I will not, she swore to him, her voice firm with newfound resolve. I swear to you, I will not. He was quiet for so long she thought he might simply leave. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet, weary. Saturday. Viridian Gardens. The same bench where you saw us. Noon. His eyes met hers, and she saw the raw fear beneath his anger. But I introduce you as an old friend, nothing more. And if at any point I think this is hurting them, it is over. Forever. He stood to leave then, turning back briefly. Do not make me regret this, Seraphina. They have been hurt enough. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Viridian Gardens look like a postcard. Seraphina had changed outfits 4 times, finally settling on jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that felt foreign on her body, accustomed as she was to power suits and designer heels. She spotted them before they saw her. Caleb walked slowly, his gait slightly unsteady, while 2 blonde whirlwinds raced ahead toward the playground. Even from a distance she could discern the subtle differences between them, one girl confident and bold, the other more cautious, staying closer to Caleb. Hazel, Ivy, come here, Caleb called, his voice carrying that patient, gentle tone she remembered from their early days together. The girls bounded over, and Seraphina's breath caught. They were beautiful, all golden curls and bright, inquisitive eyes, with Caleb's gentle smile and features she could not help but recognize as her own. Girls, I would like you to meet an old friend of mine, Caleb said carefully. This is Seraphina. The more outgoing twin, Ivy, Seraphina guessed, stepped forward immediately with a gap-toothed grin. Hi, are you Daddy's girlfriend? Ivy, Caleb's cheeks reddened slightly, but Seraphina laughed, the first genuine, uninhibited laugh she had had in years. No, sweetheart, your daddy and I were friends a long time ago. Hazel hung back, studying Serafina with intelligent eyes that seemed to see too much. You look familiar, she said quietly, her gaze penetrating. Serafina's heart stopped. Do I? Hazel thinks everyone looks familiar, Ivy interjected, tugging on Serafina's sleeve. She says the mailman looks like our neighbor and our teacher looks like the lady on TV. Want to see us on the swings? I would love to. For the next hour, Serafina experienced something she had never thought possible, pure, uncomplicated joy. Ivy chattered constantly, regaling her with stories about kindergarten, her best friend Clara, and the hamster they were not allowed to have because their apartment was too small. Hazel remained more reserved but gradually warmed up, especially when Serafina helped her across the monkey bars. You're really strong, Hazel observed, hanging from the bars, her small hands gripping tightly. Most grown-ups cannot hold me up this long. I used to do gymnastics when I was your age, Serafina replied, surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. Really? Can you do a cartwheel? Before she knew it, Serafina was demonstrating cartwheels on the grass while both girls squealed with unbridled delight. Caleb watched from the bench, his expression unreadable, a complex mixture of emotions. Daddy, can Serafina come to our house for dinner? Ivy asked suddenly, her innocent question hanging in the crisp autumn air like a profound challenge. Caleb's eyes met Serafina's, and she saw the protective father warring with something softer, something akin to longing. Maybe another time, he said gently. But we never have company, Hazel added, her observation cutting straight to the heart of their isolated little world. We will see, Caleb replied, but his tone suggested the subject was firmly closed. As they prepared to leave, Ivy threw her arms around Serafina's waist in an impulsive hug. I hope we see you again soon. Hazel was more hesitant, but she offered a small, shy wave. Walking away, Serafina felt something she had not experienced in 5 years, hope, profoundly mixed with overwhelming love for two little girls who were, paradoxically, both strangers and yet felt like coming home. Behind her, she heard Ivy ask Caleb, why did your face look sad when you looked at the pretty lady? The question followed Serafina all the way back to Metropolis Island. 3 weeks later, Caleb agreed to another meeting, this time at the City Wildlife Preserve. Serafina arrived early, her heart racing with the same nervous energy she had once reserved for million-dollar presentations. The difference was that no boardroom had ever mattered this much. She found them at the penguin exhibit, Hazel pressed against the glass while Ivy bounced excitedly beside her father. Today Caleb looked particularly pale, and she noticed he gripped the railing more tightly than necessary. Serafina, Ivy spotted her first, racing over with her characteristic enthusiasm. Look, the penguins are having a party. Hazel followed more slowly but smiled when she saw her. We have been here for an hour, Daddy needed to sit down a lot. The casual comment made Serafina glance at Caleb with immediate concern, but he meticulously avoided her eyes. Should we see the lions next? Serafina suggested, trying to lighten the atmosphere. Yes, Ivy grabbed her hand without hesitation. But we have to walk slow because Daddy gets tired easy now. The innocent words hit Serafina like a physical blow. Hazel nodded matter-of-factly, clearly accustomed to accommodating their father's limitations. The doctor says Daddy's muscles do not work the same as other people's, Hazel explained with the clinical precision of a child who had heard medical explanations too many times. That's why he takes those big pills that taste yucky. Hazel. Caleb warned quietly, but his daughter, undeterred, continued with the brutal honesty of childhood. The pills cost lots of money. I heard Daddy on the phone saying, our bank account is sad because the medicine is expensive. Ivy nodded gravely. That's why we cannot have the hamster and why we eat mac and cheese so much. Serafina felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Caleb was sick, seriously sick, and struggling to afford treatment while raising two little girls alone. The full weight of her abandonment crashed over her with fresh, agonizing force. Can we see the monkeys now? Ivy asked, oblivious to the bombshell she had just dropped. Of course, sweetheart, Serafina managed, her voice barely steady. As they walked slowly, carefully accommodating Caleb's careful pace, Serafina watched him with new eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way he leaned against exhibits, the deliberate, careful way he moved. How had she missed it during their tense cafe meeting? How long had he been fighting this silent battle alone? At the monkey house, the girls pressed against the viewing window, giggling at the primate's antics. Caleb slumped onto a nearby bench, and Serafina seized the moment. Caleb, she said quietly, sitting beside him. What is wrong with you, medically I mean? His jaw tightened. It is none of your concern. Those are my daughters watching you struggle. It is absolutely my concern. Your daughters. His voice was sharp despite its weakness. Since when? Since the moment they were born, whether I was brave enough to claim them or not, she met his angry gaze steadily. What is the diagnosis? He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. Progressive muscular dystrophy, adult onset. The doctors say I have maybe 10 good years left before. He did not finish the sentence, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Serafina's breath caught. Caleb, my God. How long have you known? 2 years. It started with muscle weakness, tremors. I thought it was just stress from single parenting. His laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. Turns out stress does not cause degenerative muscle disease. What about treatment? There is experimental therapy, gene therapy trials, new medications. But insurance does not cover experimental, and even with my teacher's salary, he shrugged helplessly. How much? Serafina pressed, her voice urgent. How much does the treatment cost? It does not matter. I cannot afford it. So how much, Caleb? She insisted. He looked at her then, and she saw the raw, crushing defeat in his eyes. 15,000 a month, minimum. Could be more depending on how I respond. 15,000. She spent more than that on business dinners some months. The solution was so simple it made her dizzy. Daddy, Ivy called from the exhibit, come see this monkey looks just like Mr. Peterson from next door. Caleb struggled to his feet, and Serafina watched him force a bright smile for his daughters, their daughters, even as his body betrayed him with every movement. We should head home soon, he told the girls. Daddy's getting tired. Can Serafina walk us to the subway? Hazel asked. She makes you smile more. The observation, delivered with a child's innocent clarity, hung in the air between them. Caleb did smile more when she was around. Serafina had noticed it too. Despite everything, despite the years of hurt and anger, there was still something tangible between them, something undeniably worth fighting for. Walking to the subway, Serafina made a decision that would change everything, yet again. Serafina could not sleep for 3 days after the city wildlife preserve visit. Caleb's devastating revelation consumed her thoughts. She had built a fortune making calculated risks, but this felt different, more profoundly personal than any business deal she had ever negotiated. She found him Tuesday evening waiting outside the girls' elementary school. Parents clustered in small groups, but Caleb sat alone on a bench, looking utterly exhausted. The other mothers gave him sympathetic smiles, clearly aware of his condition. "We need to talk," Serafina said, approaching him directly. He looked up, startled. "Serafina, what are you doing here?" "About your treatment. About the 15,000 a month you cannot afford while you are slowly dying." "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing around at the other parents. "This is not the place." "Then where is the place, Caleb?" she countered, her voice rising slightly. "When will you stop being too proud to let me help?" The school doors opened, releasing a joyful flood of children. Hazel and Ivy spotted them immediately, their faces lighting up with surprise and delight. "Serafina! Daddy, why did you not tell us she was coming?" Ivy bounced excitedly between them. "It is a surprise visit," Serafina said smoothly, improvising. "I was hoping I could walk you home and talk to your daddy about something important." During the 6-block walk to their apartment, the girls chattered about their day while Caleb remained pointedly silent. Serafina saw their building, a modest pre-war structure that had seen better decades, and felt another pang of guilt. This was what her choice had reduced them to. "Can you girls play in your room for a few minutes?" Caleb asked once they were inside the small apartment. "Serafina and I need to talk." The apartment was tiny but immaculately clean. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, homework was neatly stacked on the kitchen table, and everything spoke of a father doing his absolute best with limited resources. "I know what you are going to say," Caleb began once the girl's bedroom door closed, "and the answer is no. You have not heard my offer. I do not need to. You want to throw money at the problem because that is what you do. But I will not be your charity case, Serafina. I will not owe you anything else. This is not charity." Her voice rose then dropped as she remembered the girls could hear. "This is about Hazel and Ivy having their father alive and healthy. Do not," his voice was deadly quiet, filled with a chilling intensity. "Do not you dare use my daughters to manipulate me." "Our daughters," she corrected, her voice firm. "And I am not manipulating anyone. I am offering to pay for your treatment because it is the right thing to do." "Right," Caleb laughed bitterly. "What is right would have been you staying 5 years ago. What is right would have been you being here when I got the diagnosis, when I spent countless nights terrified about what would happen to them if I died. The accusation hit home, striking a painful chord, but Serafina pressed on. I cannot change the past, but I can help with the future. Let me pay for the treatment, Caleb. Let me do this one thing right. And then what? You disappear again when you get bored? When being a family gets too complicated for your corporate lifestyle? I am not going anywhere. You said that before, the night you proposed to me. You said we would build a life together. The morning the girls were born, you held them and promised you would never let anything hurt them. Your word does not mean much to me anymore. Each accusation was justified, each wound self-inflicted. Serafina had no defense except the stark, painful truth. I was different then. Scared. Selfish. Completely unprepared for the raw reality of parenthood. But seeing you with them, seeing what an amazing father you have become, seeing what I almost lost, she took a shaky breath, her voice thick with emotion. I am not the same person who walked out that door. Prove it. How? Stay. Not just for city wildlife preserve visits and playground meetings. Stay and help me raise them. Be their mother. Not just their rich benefactor. The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down, demanding an answer that would redefine everything. Everything she had built, her entire identity as a corporate powerhouse, would have to be restructured around two little girls who barely knew her. If I do this, she said carefully, her voice steadying. If I commit to being their mother, you let me pay for your treatment. No arguments, no wounded pride. This becomes a partnership. Caleb studied her for a long, intense moment. From the bedroom came the soft sound of Hazel reading to Ivy, a routine that spoke of countless nights when he had been too tired to manage bedtime stories himself. You would really walk away from Aegis Holdings? I would find a way to balance both. Work remotely. Delegate more. Restructure my priorities. But yes, if it came down to choosing, I would choose them. Why should I believe you? Because I am asking you to let me prove it instead of just expecting you to trust me. She met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. Give me the chance to earn their love, and let me give you the chance to live long enough to see them grow up. Through the thin walls they could hear Ivy giggling at something Hazel had read, the pure sound of their daughter's happiness filling the silence between them. Finally, Caleb nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. One chance, Serafina. You hurt them, you hurt me, and if you fail, it is over forever. I understand. Treatment starts next week. And you start being their mother every single day. Not just when it is convenient. As she left that evening, Serafina realized she had just made the biggest commitment of her life, not to a business deal or a corporate merger, but to two little girls who deserved a mother who would never leave them again. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 a.m. sharp. Serafina's senior partners filled the mahogany conference room, their faces reflecting confusion and barely concealed panic. In 15 years of building Aegis Holdings from a small consulting firm into a multi-billion-dollar empire, she had never called a meeting like this. Ladies and gentlemen, Serafina began, standing at the head of the table she had commanded for over a decade. Effective immediately, I am stepping back from day-to-day operations. The room erupted. Bennett Croft, her oldest partner, looked as if she had just announced the company's bankruptcy. "Serafina, what are you talking about? The Morrison deal closes next week. The Singapore expansion. We will proceed as planned under your capable leadership," she interrupted calmly. "I am not abandoning the company. I am restructuring my role." "For how long?" asked Zara Khan, the CFO. "Indefinitely." The silence that followed was deafening. These people had built their careers around her relentless drive, her singular focus on growth and profit. The woman who had once worked 18-hour days, who had never taken a vacation longer than 3 days, was effectively stepping away from everything she had built. "Is this a health issue?" Bennett Croft asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. "You could say that." Serafina's voice softened, a hint of tenderness entering her usually brisk tone. "But not mine." Within hours, the news leaked. By afternoon, financial blogs were speculating about hostile takeovers and corporate instability. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from investors, reporters, and concerned colleagues. She ignored them all. Instead, she stood in a cramped Willow Creek apartment watching Caleb pack a small overnight bag for his first round of experimental treatment. Hazel and Ivy sat on the couch, unusually quiet as they absorbed the gravity of the situation. "The treatment takes 3 days, Caleb explained to them for the 3rd time. "Serafina will stay with you while I am gone." "Will the medicine make you better, Daddy?" Hazel asked, her voice small, filled with a child's quiet fear. "The doctors hope so, sweetheart." Ivy, ever the optimist, brightened. "And Serafina will make us pancakes like you do." "We will figure out pancakes together," Serafina promised, though she had never made pancakes in her life. After Caleb left for Evergreen Medical Center, the full reality of her decision hit her. She was alone with 2 5-year-olds who barely knew her, in an apartment the size of her walk-in closet, with no staff, no assistant, and absolutely no idea how to manage the most important job she had ever taken on. The first disaster struck at dinner. She had ordered Thai food, forgetting that children's palates differed significantly from sophisticated adult tastes. Ivy took one bite of pad Thai and made a face as if she had been poisoned. "It is too spicy," she wailed. "Daddy always makes mac and cheese." "I do not know how to make mac and cheese," Serafina admitted, feeling more helpless than she had in any boardroom negotiation. "From the box," Hazel said matter-of-factly. "Blue box. Orange powder." The next 2 hours were a crash course in domestic reality. Burned mac and cheese was scraped from the pot, bath time turned into a flood that soaked the bathroom floor, bedtime stories required voices and sound effects she had never practiced. Hazel cried for her father. Ivy had a nightmare and crawled into Serafina's makeshift bed on the couch. Ding! Midnight. With both girls finally asleep, Serafina sat in the small living room surrounded by the detritus of her first day as a mother. Her phone showed 47 missed calls and hundreds of unread emails. The business world was in crisis mode, demanding her attention. She turned the phone off. For the first time in 15 years, something mattered more than work. 2 little girls who needed her to be present, to be reliable, to be the mother she had never learned how to be. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was exactly where she needed to be. Day 3 without Caleb brought Serafina face to face with the morning routine from hell. Hazel stood in the kitchen wearing one sock, her hair resembling a bird's nest, while Ivy sat at the table in her pajamas systematically picking marshmallows out of her cereal. "We are going to be late for school," Serafina announced, checking her watch with the same anxiety she had once reserved for missing board meetings. "Daddy always braids my hair," Hazel said, holding up a hairbrush like it was a foreign object. "I do not know how to braid." "YouTube," Hazel suggested with the wisdom of the digital generation. 20 minutes and 3 failed attempts later, Hazel's hair was secured in what charitably could be called a ponytail. Ivy had dressed herself in striped leggings, a polka-dot dress, and rain boots despite the sunny weather. "Is this what you want to wear?" Serafina asked diplomatically, trying to maintain composure. "Daddy says I can wear whatever makes me happy," Ivy declared, twirling to show off her ensemble. The walk to school was a revelation in chaos management. Hazel worried aloud about whether her lunch was properly packed while Ivy stopped every few feet to examine interesting sidewalk cracks. Other parents smiled sympathetically at Serafina's obvious bewilderment, recognizing the universal struggles of parenthood. Ms. Chen, Hazel's teacher, approached them at the school gate. "You must be the family friend Caleb mentioned. I am so glad someone is helping while he is getting treatment." "Yes, I am," Serafina hesitated, searching for the right description. What was she, exactly? "I am Serafina. Hazel has been asking about her father. Perhaps you could reassure her." Serafina knelt to Hazel's level, suddenly aware that every single word mattered. "Daddy is getting medicine to make him stronger. He will be home tomorrow, and the doctors are taking very good care of him." Hazel nodded solemnly but did not look convinced. "Will you pick us up after school?" "I will be right here at 3. I promise." The promise felt weightier than any contract she had ever signed. The afternoon pickup brought new challenges. Ivy bounded out of kindergarten covered in finger paint and playground dirt while Hazel emerged looking troubled. "Clara asked why I do not have a real mom," Hazel said quietly as they walked home. "I told her my mom went away, but she said that means she did not love me enough to stay." Serafina's heart clenched. She stopped walking and knelt on the sidewalk, ignoring the other parents streaming past. "Hazel, listen to me very carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, really big, terrible mistakes. But that does not mean they do not love you. Sometimes it means they love you so much they do not know how to do it right. Did my real mom make a mistake?" The question hung in the air like a test Serafina was not prepared for. The truth was too complicated for a 5-year-old, but she could not lie either. "Yes, sweetheart, she made a very big mistake. But she is trying to fix it now." "How do you know?" "Because," Serafina said, her voice thick with emotion, "she told me so." That evening, as she helped with homework at the kitchen table where Caleb usually sat, Serafina realized she was learning more than how to be a mother. She was learning what she had missed, not just the first 5 years of her daughters' lives, but the simple, profound joy of being needed, of mattering to someone in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic planning. Ivy fell asleep in her lap during story time. Hazel shyly asked if Serafina would check for monsters under her bed. These small victories felt more significant than any business triumph she had ever achieved. Tomorrow Caleb would come home from his first treatment cycle. Tomorrow she would have to prove that her commitment was more than just good intentions. Tonight, she was simply a woman learning to be a mother. 2 weeks into Caleb's treatment, the emergency call came at 2 in the morning. His voice was weak, strained with pain, and she could hear it even through the phone static. "Serafina, I need you to bring the girls to Evergreen Medical Center. There were complications with the treatment. I am being admitted for observation." She found him in the emergency room, pale and connected to monitors that beeped ominously. Hazel and Ivy, hastily dressed and clutching their favorite stuffed animals, stared at their father with wide, frightened eyes. "Daddy looks scary," Ivy whispered, pressing against Serafina's leg. "He is going to be okay," Serafina said, though her own voice trembled. "The doctors are taking very good care of him." The attending physician, Dr. Vivian Lee, pulled her aside while the girls climbed carefully onto Caleb's hospital bed. "The experimental treatment sometimes causes severe muscle inflammation. We need to monitor him for at least 48 hours, possibly longer." "Is he in danger?" "Not immediately, but we need to be cautious." "Are you family?" The question caught her off guard. Legally, she was nothing to them. But watching Hazel smooth Caleb's hair while Ivy held his hand, she realized that family was not always about legal documents. "I am their mother," she said quietly, her voice imbued with a new certainty. The first night in the hospital was a revelation in vulnerability. Caleb drifted in and out of medicated sleep while the girls refused to leave his side. Serafina found herself arranging 3 uncomfortable chairs into makeshift beds, using her designer coat as a blanket for Ivy. "I am scared," Hazel confessed around midnight, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment's constant humming. "Me too," Serafina admitted, pulling both girls close. "But we are going to stay right here with Daddy, okay? We are not going anywhere." Hazel studied her face in the dim light. "Daddy said you went away before. Will you go away again if he gets sicker?" The question pierced straight through her carefully constructed defenses, striking at her deepest fears. "No, sweetheart, I am never leaving you again. Not ever. Promise?" "I promise." By dawn, all 3 of them were asleep in the cramped chairs, Ivy curled in Serafina's lap, Hazel's head on her shoulder, their small bodies trusting her with their safety in a way that humbled her completely. Caleb woke to find them that way. Despite his weakness, he smiled at the sight. "You stayed," he said quietly, his voice raspy. "Of course I stayed. My girls do not usually sleep for strangers." Serafina looked down at Hazel and Ivy, still peaceful in sleep despite the hospital's harsh fluorescent lighting and constant noise. "I am not a stranger anymore." The second night brought new challenges. Ivy developed a fever, probably from exhaustion and stress. Hazel refused to eat anything from the hospital cafeteria. Caleb grew increasingly agitated, worried about his daughter's well-being while unable to care for them himself. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he told Serafina during one of his lucid moments. They should not have to see me like this. They should not have to live with the uncertainty. They are not living with uncertainty, Serafina replied, adjusting Ivy's makeshift blanket. They are living with love. There is a difference. What happens when the treatment does not work? What happens when I get worse? Then we face it together. All of us. Hazel stirred in her chair, mumbling Caleb's name. Serafina moved quietly to her side, stroking her hair until she settled back into sleep. You are different, Caleb observed. The old Serafina would have hired a nanny to handle this. The old Serafina did not understand that some things simply cannot be delegated. When they finally returned home after Caleb's 72-hour observation, something fundamental had changed. The girls no longer saw Serafina as their father's friend or a temporary caregiver. They saw her as the person who had stayed with them through their scariest night, who had held them when they were afraid, who had promised never to leave. They saw her as their mother. 3 months had passed since Serafina first stepped back into their lives. The morning routine had become second nature, pancakes on weekends, school pickups, bedtime stories. But Hazel had been watching, always watching, with the intensity of a child who understood more than adults gave her credit for. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Caleb was napping, exhausted from his latest treatment cycle, while Serafina helped the girls organize their art supplies. Hazel sat cross-legged on the living room floor studying a family photo Caleb kept on the side table, one of the few pictures that included Serafina from before she left. "This is you," Hazel said suddenly, holding up the photo. It was not a question, more an observation. Serafina's hand stilled on the crayon box. "Yes, that is me. You look younger and you are holding us as babies." Ivy looked up from her coloring book, curious. "Really? Let me see." Hazel showed her sister the photo, pointing to Serafina's face. "See, same nose, same smile. And look, she is holding both of us." The moment Serafina had dreaded and anticipated for months had arrived with the quiet inevitability of truth. She sat down on the floor, facing both girls, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hazel, Ivy, there is something I need to tell you." Caleb appeared in the doorway, awakened by the serious tone in her voice. He leaned against the frame, prepared to intervene if necessary, but ready to let her handle this moment she had earned the right to have. "You are a real mommy, are not you?" Hazel said, her voice matter-of-fact despite the enormous weight of the question. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." Ivy's eyes went wide. "But where were you? Why were not you here before?" This was the hardest part, explaining adult failures to children who deserved simple truths without destroying their sense of security. "When you were babies, I was very scared," Serafina began carefully. "Being a mommy felt too big and too scary for me, so I made a terrible mistake. I went away. You left us." Hazel's voice was small, hurt. "I did. And it was wrong. It was the worst thing I have ever done." "But you came back," Ivy said, moving closer to Serafina with the forgiveness that came naturally to her generous heart. "I came back because I realized that being scared is not a good reason to leave the people you love. I came back because I wanted to be your mommy the right way this time." Hazel was not so easily satisfied. But what if you get scared again? What if you leave? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Caleb watched from the doorway, and Serafina could feel his tension. This was the test that mattered most, not just convincing him of her commitment, but earning the profound trust of two little girls who had every reason to protect their hearts. "I understand why you are worried," Serafina said, her voice gentle yet firm. "I broke your trust before you were even old enough to know what trust meant. But I promise you this, I will never, ever leave you again. Even if I am scared, even if things get hard, I will always be here." "How do we know you mean it?" Hazel asked, her mother's pragmatism showing through. Serafina thought of all the ways adults make promises to children, empty reassurances, conditional love, good intentions that fade when life gets complicated. Instead, she offered the only thing that truly mattered. "Because I love you more than I love anything else in the world. More than my job. More than being comfortable. More than being safe. I love you enough to stay, even when staying is scary." Ivy launched herself into Serafina's arms with the wholehearted acceptance of a child who had decided to trust again. Hazel hesitated longer, studying Serafina's face with eyes too old for her age. Finally, she asked the question that broke Serafina's heart. "Can I call you Mommy?" "I would love that more than anything," Serafina whispered, tears streaming down her face as Hazel finally, carefully settled into her arms. From the doorway, Caleb wiped his own eyes. The family he had tried to hold together alone was finally, truly whole. The word mommy did not come easily at first. Ivy used it liberally, delighting in having a title for Serafina that matched her friends' mothers. Hazel was more cautious, testing the word like a new flavor she was not sure she liked. But slowly, trust grew through small moments. When Hazel had a nightmare about monsters, she called for Serafina instead of Caleb. When Ivy's favorite doll lost an arm, she brought it to Mommy for fixing. These tiny victories felt more significant than any corporate achievement Serafina had ever earned. The real breakthrough came during a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Caleb was at his weekly treatment appointment, and Serafina was attempting to help with homework at the kitchen table that had become their family headquarters. "I cannot do it," Hazel threw down her pencil in frustration, tears threatening over a math worksheet that seemed designed to torture 6-year-olds. "Hey, it is okay," Serafina said, moving her chair closer. "Let us figure it out together. Daddy's better at math. Daddy's better at lots of things. But I am here now, and we are going to figure this out." 20 minutes later, Hazel had solved the problems herself with minimal guidance, her face lit up with pride. "I did it, Mommy. I did it." The words slipped out naturally, without self-consciousness. Hazel froze, realizing what she had said. But Serafina simply smiled. "Yes, you did. I am so proud of you." That evening, Serafina established a new tradition: pancakes for dinner whenever someone had a particularly good day. The girls giggled as she flipped pancakes with varying degrees of success, and Caleb laughed from his spot at the table, looking healthier than he had in months. "These are terrible," Ivy announced cheerfully, syrup covering her face. "They are perfect," Hazel corrected, meeting Serafina's eyes with a smile. Later, as Serafina tucked them into their bunk beds, Caleb had built himself in their shared room. Hazel grabbed her hand. "Mommy, are you happy you came back?" "Every single day," Serafina replied honestly. "Good, because we need you." In the living room afterward, Caleb sat on their second-hand couch, medical bills spread across the coffee table. The experimental treatment was working, his strength was returning gradually, but the financial strain remained enormous. "I found a way to work remotely more often," Serafina said, settling beside him. "I can be here for school pickups, sick days, everything important. You do not have to sacrifice your career for us." "I am not sacrificing anything. I am choosing what matters most." Caleb looked at her, really looked, and she saw the last walls of his resistance finally crumbling. "They love you," he said quietly. "I love them too, more than I ever thought possible." "And us? What are we now?" It was the question they had been dancing around for months. Serafina took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of single parenthood. "We are a family," she said simply. "However complicated, however unconventional. We are a family." "Are you sure about this?" Caleb asked for the third time as Serafina adjusted his tie. 6 months of treatment had restored color to his cheeks, though he still tired easily. "They are my parents, Caleb. They have a right to meet their granddaughters." The dinner at Serafina's childhood home in Northwood County was carefully orchestrated. Her parents, Genevieve and Frederick Hayes, had built their own modest fortune in real estate, but their wealth paled compared to what their daughter had achieved. They had been shocked by her sudden retreat from corporate life, bewildered by her explanation about family responsibilities. Hazel and Ivy sat in the back of Serafina's car, dressed in their nicest clothes and slightly awed by the prospect of meeting grandparents they had never known existed. "Will they like us?" Ivy asked as they pulled through the iron gates of the estate. "They are going to love you," Serafina promised, though her stomach churned with nerves. Genevieve Hayes opened the door with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to entertaining, but her composure cracked the moment she saw the twins. 2 blonde angels stared up at her with curious eyes, her granddaughters, meeting her for the first time at age 6. "Oh my," she whispered, kneeling to their level. "You are even more beautiful than your pictures." Frederick Hayes appeared behind his wife, his stern business demeanor melting as Hazel shyly offered him a drawing she had made in the car. "This is for you, Grandpa." The word hit him like a physical blow. At 72, he had never thought he would hear it. Dinner transformed from a formal affair into chaos as the girls charmed their grandparents completely. Ivy regaled them with stories about kindergarten while Hazel quietly observed, warming gradually to these new adults who hung on their every word. "Daddy was very sick," Ivy announced over dessert, but Mommy came back and helped make him better. Genevieve's eyes met Serafina's across the table. They had spoken briefly about Caleb's condition, but hearing it from Ivy gave it new weight. "Mommy came back," Frederick asked gently. "She was lost for a while," Hazel explained with 6-year-old logic, "but she found us again." Later, as the girls played in the garden where Serafina had once played, Genevieve pulled her daughter aside. "I have never seen you like this," she said quietly. "You look peaceful." "I am." For the first time in my adult life, I am exactly where I belong. And Caleb? Are you? We are figuring it out, day by day. Frederick joined them on the terrace, Caleb beside him. The two men had found common ground, discussing the girl's education and Caleb's gradual recovery. "He is a good man," Frederick said simply. "And those girls, they are extraordinary." "They get that from their father," Serafina replied, watching Caleb push both girls on the garden swing set. "No," Genevieve said softly. "They get their strength from him, but their spirit, that is all you, sweetheart. Even when you were small, you had that same fierce determination." As they drove home that evening, Ivy fell asleep against Caleb's shoulder while Hazel leaned against Serafina. "I like having grandparents," Hazel murmured sleepily. "And they love having you," Serafina replied, realizing that she had just given her daughters something she had never thought to offer before, an extended family, roots that went deeper than their small apartment in Riverside Borough. The circle was expanding, love multiplying in ways she had never imagined possible. 6 months later, as autumn painted Viridian gardens in shades of gold and crimson, Hazel and Ivy's 6th birthday approached with the weight of significance none of them could ignore. It would be their first celebration as a complete family, a milestone that felt both joyous and bittersweet. Serafina threw herself into planning with the same intensity she had once reserved for corporate acquisitions. She booked the Skyline Ballroom, hired a celebrity children's entertainer, and ordered a custom cake that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "It is too much," Caleb said quietly, reviewing the guest list that included half of Metropolis Island's social elite alongside the girls' kindergarten classmates. "It is their first real birthday party with both parents," Serafina defended. "I want it to be perfect." "Perfect for who? For them or for you?" The question stung, because it held truth. Hazel, ever observant, had been quieter than usual as the elaborate plans unfolded. Ivy seemed excited by the grandeur, but even she asked why they could not just have cake at home like last year. 3 days before the party, Hazel climbed into Serafina's lap during their evening reading time. "Mommy, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, sweetheart. I do not want a big party. I just want you and Daddy and Ivy, and maybe Grandma and Grandpa. And maybe we could have a picnic in the park where you first saw us again." Serafina's throat tightened. "You do not want the Skyline Ballroom, the magician, the pony rides?" Hazel shook her head solemnly. "I just want us to be together. Like a real family." That night after the girls were asleep, Serafina made a dozen phone calls, canceling every elaborate arrangement she had made. Caleb found her on the couch, surrounded by party planning debris and looking shell-shocked. "What happened?" "Hazel wants a picnic. Just family. I have been planning my fantasy of their perfect birthday instead of listening to what they actually wanted." Caleb sat beside her, pulling her close. The old Serafina would never have changed course once she had made a decision. The old Serafina was not very good at being a mother. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. Viridian Gardens bustled with early autumn activity as Serafina spread blankets on the grass near the bench where she had first seen Caleb with the girls almost a year ago. Genevieve and Frederick arrived with arms full of simple, thoughtful gifts, art supplies for Hazel, building blocks for Ivy, books they could read together as a family. The birthday celebration was beautifully ordinary. They played hide-and-seek behind trees, fed ducks at the pond, and sang happy birthday over a homemade chocolate cake that listed slightly to one side but tasted like love. "Make a wish," Serafina encouraged as the girls leaned over their shared cake, 6 candles flickering in the gentle breeze. Hazel and Ivy exchanged a look, that twin telepathy that had developed over their 6 years together, and blew out the candles in perfect unison. "What did you wish for?" Genevieve asked. "Cannot tell or it will not come true," Ivy said solemnly, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. Later as they packed up the picnic remnants, Hazel tugged on Serafina's sleeve. "Mommy, I can tell you my wish now because it already came true." "Oh, what was it?" "I wished for us to be a real family forever." "And we are not we? You and Daddy and me and Ivy." Serafina knelt to Hazel's level, this serious little girl who had inherited her analytical mind but Caleb's generous heart. "Yes, sweetheart, we are a real family. Even though you went away before, especially because I came back. Some families are born together, and some families choose each other. We did both." Ivy threw her arms around both of them, nearly knocking them over with her enthusiasm. "Best birthday ever." As they walked home in the fading afternoon light, Caleb carrying a sleepy Ivy while Hazel held Serafina's hand, they passed the bench where it had all started. Serafina paused, remembering the broken woman who had sat in that Tesla a year ago, watching a life she thought she would never be worthy of claiming. "Penny for your thoughts?" Caleb asked. "Just thinking about second chances," she replied. "And how sometimes the best gifts are the ones we almost threw away." Hazel squeezed her hand. "Like you came back to us. Like I came back to you." The setting sun painted the park in golden light as they headed home, a real family, imperfect and complicated, and absolutely complete. 1 year later, Saturday morning sunlight streamed through the windows of their new apartment, still in Riverside Borough but bigger now, with separate rooms for Hazel and Ivy and a kitchen where they could all cook together. The sounds of domestic chaos filled the air. Caleb humming off-key while flipping pancakes, Hazel and Ivy arguing good-naturedly about which movie to watch later, the coffee maker gurgling its familiar morning symphony. Serafina stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, watching the scene with a wonder that had not faded even after 15 months of mornings like this. She had learned to find magic in the mundane, sticky fingers on clean counters, cereal crunching underfoot, the particular brand of exhaustion that came from loving people more than sleep. "Mommy, tell Ivy that we watched Frozen yesterday," Hazel called from the breakfast table, her hair still tousled from sleep. "We can watch it again," Serafina said diplomatically. "It is Saturday movie marathon day." Caleb caught her eye over the girls' heads and smiled, the same gentle smile that had captured her heart 8 years ago, now deepened by shared struggles and hard-won happiness. His latest medical checkup had shown remarkable improvement. The experimental treatment, now fully covered and showing consistent results, had not only stopped the disease's progression but actually restored much of his strength. "Corporate meeting this afternoon?" he asked, spatula in hand. "Video conference from home, 2 hours max." She had restructured her entire business model around being present for the moments that mattered. Aegis Holdings still thrived under her strategic guidance, but she had learned the difference between being indispensable and being absent. "Can we make cookies while you work?" Ivy asked hopefully. "The ones with the sprinkles." "As long as you do not burn down the kitchen," Serafina replied, earning delighted giggles. These were the victories she had never thought to measure: successful cookie baking, homework completed without tears, bedtime stories that ended with sleepy kisses instead of tantrums. Her definition of success had undergone a complete revolution. The afternoon brought its own rhythm. While Serafina conducted her business call from the makeshift office in their bedroom, she could hear Caleb helping the girls with their weekend art project. Through the thin walls came bursts of laughter, gentle corrections, and the comfortable chaos of a family occupying the same space without needing to perform for each other. "The quarterly projections look excellent," Bennett Croft's voice crackled through her laptop speaker during the board meeting. "Though we still think you could increase profit significantly if you return to full-time operations." "I am exactly where I need to be," Serafina replied, watching through her doorway as Hazel showed Caleb a drawing of their family, four stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "My priorities have changed, and they are not changing back." That evening, as she tucked the girls into their beds, Hazel's room decorated with books and art supplies, Ivy's an explosion of colors and stuffed animals, Serafina reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Mommy," Ivy whispered as Serafina adjusted her blankets. "Are you happy you came back to us?" "Every single day," Serafina whispered back, the same answer she had given hundreds of times, but meant more deeply with each repetition. "Even when we are bad?" "Especially when you are bad. That is when you need me most." In Hazel's room, her older daughter, older by 12 minutes as she frequently reminded everyone, had a different question. "Do you miss your old life before us?" Serafina sat on the edge of Hazel's bed, considering the question with the honesty her perceptive daughter deserved. "I miss feeling important in boardrooms," she said finally. "But I would rather be important to you and Ivy. I miss having my picture in magazines, but I would rather see your artwork on our refrigerator. I miss making decisions that affected thousands of people, but I would rather make pancakes that make two little girls smile." Hazel nodded seriously. "So you are happy?" "I am complete," Serafina replied. "There is a difference." Later, sitting on the couch with Caleb as they watched the late news, Serafina felt the profound peace that came from living a life aligned with her deepest values. The financial headlines scrolled past: mergers and acquisitions, market fluctuations, corporate victories and defeats, and she felt no longing for that world. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked as if reading her thoughts. "Just one," she said quietly. "That it took me so long to understand what really mattered." "But you figured it out." "We figured it out. All of us. Together." As they prepared for bed, Serafina caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who had sat in that Tesla 15 months ago. This woman had laugh lines and worry lines, hands that knew how to braid hair and heal scraped knees. This woman had found her way home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, school events to attend, work to balance, the endless negotiations of family life. But tonight, listening to the quiet sounds of her family sleeping safely around her, Serafina Hayes knew she had finally become the person she was meant to be, not the most successful CEO in Metropolis Island, simply and completely a mother who would never leave again. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that they're seen, heard, and valued. Like this video if you believe in the power of chosen family, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the strength found in unexpected places.